Alright guys, The Fall of the House of Usher Part 3. I was visiting an old friend of mine, Roger Usher, in his old stone house, his palace, where a feeling of death hung in the air. I saw how fear was pressing on his heart and mind. Now his only sister, the Lady Madeline, had died, and we had put her body in its resting place, in a room inside the cold walls of the palace, a damp, dark vault, a fearful place. And as we looked down upon her face, I saw that there was a strange likeness between the two. Indeed, said Usher, we were born on the same day, and the tie between us had always been strong. We did not long look down at her, for fear and wonder filled our hearts. There was still a little color in her face, and there seemed to be a smile on her lips. We closed the heavy iron door and returned to the vaults above. This is important. Iron is one of the strongest materials on earth, if I'm not mistaken. You may want to fact check me, but it is incredibly strong. Remember that. Which were hardly rooms above, which were hardly less gloomy than the vaults. And now a change came in the sickness of my friend's mind. He went from room to room with a hurried step. Okay, so now Roderick's acting a little weird. They put his sister into the vault, but now Roderick's walking around going from room to room to room to room to room to room. His face was, if possible, whiter and more ghastly than before, and the light in his eyes had gone. The trembling in his voice seemed to show the greatest fear, and at times he sat looking at nothing for hours, as if listening to some sound I could not hear. I felt his conviction slowly but certainly gaining power over me. I felt that his wild ideas were becoming fixed in my own mind. As I was going to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day after we placed the Lady Madeline within the vault, I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep did not come, and while the hours passed, my mind fought against the nervousness. So Roderick's condition is actually starting to rub off on this narrator, and he himself is starting to feel this nervousness. I tried to believe that much, if not all, of what I felt was due to the gloomy room, to the dark wall coverings in which a rising wind moved on the walls. But my efforts were useless. A trembling... Excuse me one sec. Maple! Hush! Love you! Crap, where was I? A trembling I could not stop filled my body, and fear without reason caught my heart. I sat up looking into the darkness of my room, listening, I do not know why, to certain low sounds which came when the storm was quiet. A feeling of horror lay upon me like a heavy weight. I put on my clothes and began walking nervously around the room. I had been walking for a very short time when I heard a light step coming toward my door, and I knew it was Usher. In a moment I saw him at my door, as usual, very white, but there was a wild laugh in his eyes. Ugh. Yeah, there's nothing like looking like a corpse but then laughing. There's something so weird about that. Even so, I was glad to have his company. And have you not seen it? He said. He hurried to one of the windows and opened it to the storm. The force of the entering wind nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a stormy but beautiful night, and wildly strange. The heavy, low-hanging clouds which seemed to pass down upon the house flew from all directions against each other, always returning and never passing away in the distance. So imagine almost like, did you guys ever fill like soda bottles with water and then like take them and spin them as long or as hard as you could and created almost like a tornado within the bottle? It's almost like the house is itself part of like a tornado that never moves. It never quite damages the house, but never goes either. It's just back and forth, and they're caught in this wind tunnel. With their great thickness, they cut off all the light from the moon and the stars, but we could see them because they were lighted from below by the air itself, which we could see rising from the dark lake and from the stones of the house itself. You must not, you shall not look out at this, I said to Usher, and I led him from the window to a seat. This appearance which surprises you has been seen in other places too. Perhaps the lake is the cause. Let us close this window. The air is cold. Here is one of the stories you like best. I will read, and you shall listen, and thus we will live through this fearful night together. And the old book which I had picked up was one written by a fool, for fools to read, and it was not in truth one that Usher liked. It was, however, the only one within easy reach, and he seemed to listen quietly. And then as I came to the part of the story in which a man, a strong man full of wine, begins to break down a door, and the sound of the dry wood as it breaks can be heard through all the forest around him. And here I stopped, for it seemed to me that from some very distant part of the house, sounds came to my ears, like those of which I had been reading. So he's reading the story, and there's a drunk man, and he's breaking boards from a door. And then all of a sudden in the distance, he hears breaking wood, or the sounds of a banging door. He's like, that's a little strange. It must have been this likeness that had made me notice them, for the sounds themselves, with the storm still increasing, were nothing to stop or interest me. I continued the story and read how the man, now entering through the broken door, discovers a strange and terrible animal of the kind so often found in these old stories. He strikes it, and it falls, and with such a cry that he has to close his ears with his hands. And here again I stopped. There could be no doubt. This time I did hear a distant sound, very much like the cry of the animal in the story. I tried to control myself so that my friend would see nothing of what I felt. I was not certain that he had heard the sound, although he had clearly changed in some way. He had slowly moved his chair so that I could not see him well, and I did see that his lips were moving as if he were speaking to himself, and his head had dropped forward, but I knew he was not asleep, for his eyes were open, and he began moving his body from side to side. So Roderick is starting to rock in his chair, slowly back and forth, almost like he's rocking in a fetal position, which we do when we are utterly and completely terrified. I began reading again and quickly came to a part of the story where a heavy piece of iron falls on a stone floor with a ringing sound. These words had just passed my lips when I heard clearly, but from far away, a loud ringing sound, as if something of iron had indeed fallen heavily upon a stone floor, or as if an iron door had closed. I lost control of myself completely, and I jumped up from my chair. Usher sat still, moving a little from side to side, his eyes turned to the floor. I rushed to his chair, and as I placed my hand on his shoulder, I felt that his whole body was trembling. A sickly smile touched his lips, and he spoke with a low, quick, and nervous voice, as if he did not know I was there. Yes, he said, I heard it. Many minutes, many hours, many days I heard it, but I did not dare to speak. We have put her living in the vault. Did I not say that my senses were too strong? I heard her movements many days ago, and yet I did not dare to speak. And now that story, but the sounds were hers. Oh, where shall I run? She is coming to ask why I put her there too. I hear her footsteps on the stairs. I hear the heavy beating of her heart. Here he jumped up and cried as if he were giving up his soul. I tell you, she now stands at the door. The great door to which he was pointing now slowly opened. It was the work of the rushing wind, perhaps, but no. Outside that door, a shape did stand, the tall figure in its grave clothes, the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white dress, and the signs of terrible efforts to escape were upon every part of her thin form. For a moment she remained trembling at the door, and then with a low cry, she fell heavily upon her brother in her pain as she died at last. She carried him down with her, down to the floor, and he too was dead, killed by his own fear. So Lady Madeline stood there, and she's covered in blood. She has no fingernails left from where she was trying to claw her way out. And as she came into the room and she saw her brother, She leapt at him, and then she died. And the idea of his dead sister leaping toward him, Roderick had a heart attack, and he also died. So brother and sister just fell into each other's arms and just collapsed dead on the floor. And this unnamed narrator is just watching this happen. I rushed from the room. I rushed from the house. I ran. The storm was around me for all its strength as I crossed the bridge, and suddenly a wild light moved along the ground at my feet, and I turned to see where it could have come from, for only the great house and its darkness were behind me. The light of that full moon, of that blood-red moon, which was now shining through that break in the front wall, that crack which I thought I had seen when I first saw the palace. Then it was only a little crack, and now widened as I watched. A strong wind came rushing over me. The whole face of the moon appeared, and I saw the great walls falling apart. There was a long and stormy shouting sound, and the deep black lake closed darkly over all that remained of the house of Usher. So the narrator is running away as fast as he can, and he turns around, and the house is just breaking and collapsing into the lake. No more. The fall of the house of Usher.